SSAS dimension attributes. In our previous nugget, we did a simple example of a cube and we discussed dimensions and measures and how it all fits together. What we're going to do in this nugget is really harness the power of the dimension attributes. There's lots of things that we can do to fine-grain our attributes. For example, we can modify columns, we can perform named calculations that are derived from existing columns, we can create relationships between the attributes and also create hierarchies. An example of a hierarchy might be having a calendar year, followed by a calendar semester, then the calendar quarter, then the month, then the date, and so on. We'll talk about key columns. There's more than one way of defining a key for a dimension. So when we talk about our key columns, we also have to talk about sorting. The order in which the columns appear in the key has a huge impact on how things sort. We're going to create from scratch a brand new solution and create a cube from that. In our last nugget, we created a really simple cube, and we didn't really modify much as far as the way attributes are displayed. And the way we created this cube was manually. In other words, we created our dimensions manually, and then from there we created a new cube using those dimensions. I'm going to show you another way of how to create our dimensions and measures with our cube wizard. So what we're going to do here is create a new project, and we'll call this Internet Sales. This will be an analysis services project. And what we're going to do here is first of all make sure that we've got a data source. So we can right click on our data source, say new data source, go to the next page, and here is our AdventureWorks DW connection. So we'll hit next. We'll use our service account, hit next again. We'll just stick with the default for the data source name and hit finish. Once we have that data source, then we can pick and choose what views we want based on the data source. So I'm going to right click on here and say new data source view, hit next, next again. Now that we have our data source, we're going to create a data source view. That's where we can narrow down what tables we're interested in. So we'll hit next, and here is the data source, and we'll hit next again. Here are all the possible tables. I'm only interested in the internet sales. So notice here, I'm going to make this a little bit wider, that we have our fact internet sales table. So we'll move that over there, and then we can add the related tables. So once again, these are just the tables that have a foreign key relationship with this fact table. Now, are we interested in all of these? I might go ahead and get rid of the currency table, as well as the fact internet sales reason. And I'm not really interested in the promotion either. Okay, there is the customer right there. We can also click Add Related Tables once again, and you'll see here that it gives us this geography table. The reason why it added that is that there is a relationship between the geography table and the customer table. Okay, so I'm going to hit Next, and here's our data source. We'll just hit Finish. We now have this helpful little diagram. And by the way, if your diagram ended up being really huge, let's say it involved 50 different tables, this diagram here would be very, very complex. So this diagram organizer is an important tool because you can always right click on here and you can create a new diagram that just shows a subset of these different tables. For example, if I was only interested in the customer information, then I could right click on here and say new diagram, and I'll call this customer, and then I could drag the various tables on there. For example, drag that right on there, as well as how this relates to the fact internet. See, there's automatically that arrow showing that there's a relationship. So you can have as many diagrams as you want in here to view your data. What's also kind of cool about this is that you can zoom in and out if you want to. So here we have, if you want to zoom in and see things in more detail, or you can zoom out and get a more general picture of what's going on. If you wanted to, you could also create your own named query. It's basically displayed as a table, but it might involve a join on several tables. And the way you would do that is just right-click on here and say New Named Query and give your custom SQL code. We're going to leave this the way it is for right now. And I'm going to zoom in so I can see this in a little bit more detail. Another cool thing to make this a little more user-friendly is to change the names of these. We're actually not changing the name, we're just giving a friendly name. So you see here how we have dim customer, dim geography, and so on. I want to get rid of the word dim. So if you click on any of these and then go to your properties window, you'll see that there's a friendly name. So I'm going to call that customer. I will call this geography. And we'll call this product, as well as sales territory. And maybe we'll just call this time, or you can call it date if you want to. It's up to you. And this is the fact table. Let's just call this internet sales. You optionally can also add a nice little description in here if you want to, if it's not really obvious. Okay, so after we have our data source, we can then save what we've got so far, and let's right-click on cubes, and we'll do a new cube. And we're going to use existing tables. So we'll hit next. Here's the page where it asks us for our measure group tables. So really, we're just interested in internet sales as far as what we're measuring, and then we hit next. In fact, if you click on suggest, it will suggest the internet sales. Here are all the different measures that we can specify. Just to be safe, I'm going to include all of these. We are going to hone in on the sales amount though, but sometimes I like to just check all of them, so if I decide to change my mind later and add other measures, they're already there. I'll hit next. Now here's where we select our new dimensions. So we can organize our data according to product, according to time, customer geography, sales territory, and even internet sales. However, internet sales is going to be our fact table. By the way, you can have a table serve both as a dimension and a fact table, but in our case, we don't want that to be a dimension. So we'll uncheck that, and we'll hit next. We can call this anything we want to. I'm just going to call this internet sales cube, and then hit finish. This should look familiar. In our little window here, we have our fact table with the yellow header and our dimensions with the blue headers. You should see in your upper left-hand corner your different measures. So if you expand this, we have all the different possible measures, and then down here we have our dimensions and then the different attributes. So if you want to modify any of your dimensions, you can always just click that edit button and you're now editing a dimension. So it's just a shortcut. Another thing you can do to get there is simply by double clicking on any of these dimensions over here. Okay, so back to our cube. You're going to be toggling back and forth a lot between your cubes and your dimensions. Another thing you should be aware of, look at the upper right-hand corner under dimensions. Looks like we only have these 4 dimensions: product, time, customer, and sales territory. However, down here we have product, due date, order date, ship date, so 3 of those date dimensions, as well as customer, sales territory, and customer sales territories. So we have 7 cube dimensions, whereas we only have 4 dimensions up here. And the reason why is these relationships over here. So if we scroll down a little bit and we see our internet sales, here we have the time. We have 3 foreign keys pointing over there. One for the order, one for the shipping date, the other for the due date. And then we also have our sales territory. In other words, that's the relationship between this table right here and our sales territory. And then we also have our customer sales territory. You'll see that there's an indirect relationship here. We have internet sales, which points to our customer, which eventually points to the sales territory right down here. So just because there's X number of dimensions defined doesn't necessarily mean that you're only going to have that same number of cube dimensions. Let's hone in on one of our dimensions here. I'm going to hone in on our customer dimension, so you can just double click on that. And you'll see that these are the only attributes that are in our customer dimension right now. We have our customer key, our geography key, and the sales territory key. Well, for the end user, those three pieces of information are not going to be really helpful because those will just be numerics. So what we can do is we can expand this a little bit. Here's our data source view, and we can make this a little bit larger so we can see everything that's in here. And I might want to add different attributes over here. So you simply drag and drop. I'm going to grab everything in here, scroll all the way down there, and you can just hit your control key, or if you want to grab everything, your shift key, and simply drag it over there. And it nicely puts things in alphabetical order. If you want to change the names of any of these attributes, it's not a problem. You just make sure you select the attribute. If you don't already see the properties right over here, you can right-click on it and say Properties, and you can scroll down until you see the name. Okay, so I might change this to be just from email address, change that to be just email. Change English education to just be education. Here's English occupation. We can just do that. So we have our different attributes here. We have our data source view. In a little while we'll talk about hierarchies. You can create attribute hierarchies if you'd like. You'll notice that we have a first name as well as a middle name and a last name. We can create a new column based on the concatenation of those three. For example, we can have a last name followed by a comma, then the first name followed by a space, and the middle initial. The way we do that is with a calculation. So if we double click on our data source here and we find our customer right there, we can right click on here and say New Named Calculation, and we'll just call this full name, and we can put an optional description in here. We'll just say concatenation of last, first, and middle. And here's where our expression can go. So we can put a case statement in here, or we can simply concatenate things together. So here I'll say last name, it's not case sensitive, plus, we want to do a literal comma and a space, plus first name, plus a literal space, plus middle name. So there is our full name, which appears down there. Now if you double click on your customer dimension, you'll see that full name doesn't show up on this attribute list yet. So the way we get that over there is we drag it. So now it's showing up right there. If you want to browse your information, just make sure that you're looking at your dimension, and you'll see that there's this browser tab right here. Now if it gives you this little warning that says, hey, click here to try the browser again, and it doesn't let you browse, what that means is you have to first of all deploy this. You have to build and deploy it. So I'm going to go to Build, Deploy Internet Sales. This will just take a few seconds. And so now that it's been processed, you can now take a look at this hierarchy, and you'll see that we have all the different attributes in there, and yes, we do have full name in there, and then you can see that there is what we call the all level. It shows us all of the records, and then if you go down here you'll see that it's in order. We have our last name, comma, first name. So that was a named calculation. Let's now focus on dealing with dates, because oftentimes there's going to be attribute relationships with the different date attributes. So I'm just going to go over here to my cube, double click on it, And really the only date that I'm concerned with is the order date. In fact, I'm not concerned with the ship date, so I'll just right click on there and delete that, as well as the due date. But for our order date, if you expand that, you'll see that you can see the different attributes. Right now there's just one attribute, which is the time key. We want to include, of course, more attributes. Let's click on Edit Time. And we want to include the calendar year, so, as well as the calendar quarter, so we can just drag those two guys over here, as well as the English month name, and then also the day number of month. So we can scroll up and you'll see it right over here. Okay, so you'll see here that we have the time key, and we can modify the time key to look a little bit different. What we're going to do first of all is just do some processing so you can see what everything looks like, and then we'll make some modifications. So let's just process this real quickly. Yes, we'll build and deploy it. Okay, everything processed just fine. Let's go to our browser and take a look at our different attributes. So here we have our different attributes. This is what our time key looks like. If you expand this level right here, you'll see that this is not really meaningful. It doesn't mean anything to me. It's just a bunch of numbers that are in order. Okay, we will make some modifications here. For our calendar quarter, you'll see that we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 for our different quarters. We also have calendar year, so 2001 through 2004. As well as the day number of month, and then the English month name right here. And notice that the order here is in alphabetical order as opposed to the order in which they occur in the year. We'll make some modifications in a little bit to that. Well, the first thing I want to do is create a hierarchy. So I'll just drag my different attributes over here. I want to start with the larger ones first. So I'll drag calendar year over here, and then the child of calendar year is going to be the quarter. The child of that is the English month name. And then of course we have the day number of month. Okay, looks good. You can right click here on the hierarchy and rename this. Maybe we'll call this calendar hierarchy. And then we can look at our different attribute relationships, and you'll see here that all 4 of these attributes right here depend directly on the time key. So now that we've created that hierarchy, I'm going to show you what it looks like when you view it in your browser. So once again, we need to process this. And then we'll go to the browser and reconnect. And let's focus in on our calendar hierarchy. So you'll see now that it's showing up right there. Okay, so once again we have the all level. It always starts out with there. And there is our calendar year. Our calendar year has the quarters. So it looks like we only have data for the 3rd and 4th quarters. Here we have quarters 1 through 4 and so on. Then you can expand this, and August, July, September, once again it's in alphabetic order. We'll make some modifications, and then we have the days, and this is also in ASCII order, so you'll see that it's not in numeric order. We can make modifications there as well. Okay, I'll scroll back up here a little bit. Instead of displaying these numbers here, what we can do is actually create our own named calculation, maybe append the year and the month and the day together, and have that display in these columns or in these rows right here. So the way we do that is we go to our data source view, so double click on there, and let's find our time table. There it is right there. And you'll see that I've already created a named calculation called full date. I'm going to right click on there so you can see what it looks like. All we're doing is grabbing the full date alternate key, extracting the month, day, and year, and concatenating spaces and commas in there. So if you do that, make sure you create that, and then you're going to add it to your cube dimension. So back to my cube right here, double click on it. We're going to say edit time right here. Go to our dimension structure. And then here's our time key. Let's just right click on there and go to the properties. Okay, so if you scroll down a little bit, there we go. The name column, right now it's set to none. If you specify that you want it to be the full date, you'll see that it's displayed a little bit differently. So let's go ahead and process it. Go to our browser, reconnect. Oh, and make sure that you choose your time key right here, and you'll see that it looks a little bit nicer now. So you'll see that we have this in date order, but it's a little more user-friendly now. Now we will have to make another change in here, because if you look at your calendar hierarchy, you'll see that these are still the numbers right here. All we need to do is make a change in this hierarchy right here. We can get rid of the day number of month and instead put the time key. Once you process it and reconnect, then you'll see that it's a little more user-friendly in that hierarchy as well. So I'll just process this real quickly. And there we have it. What else can we do differently here? Well, we have August, July, September. Those are in ASCII order, but not time order, so we need to make a change there. Let's go back to our dimension definition here. So we're just going to say edit time. And here's our dimension structure. On the right-hand side is our data source view, and you'll see that there is one attribute which is called month number of years. So that will be 1 through 12, January being 1, 12 is December. So let's include that in there, and then we're going to create a relationship between the month number of year and the English month name. So we can go into our attribute relationships right here, and I'm just going to right click and say new attribute relationship. And this is going to be, here's my English month name, and here is my month number of year, and this is going to be rigid. It will not change over time. We do that for performance reasons. Back to our dimension structure. If I right click on my English month name, go to properties, and we're going to say order by, instead of doing order by name, we're going to say order by attribute key. And the order by attribute is now, we have a choice here, month number of year. Well, let's select that. Let's reprocess this, and you'll see how it looks different in the browser. Go to your browser, reconnect. You'll see now it's July, August, September. It is in time order. Let's review what we learned in this nugget. We first of all talked about modifying columns. You can do things such as changing the sort order or modifying what the name column is going to be, so you can change what is going to be displayed. We also created named calculations. So if you want to concatenate things together, such as the last name and the first name, or the year, date, and month, you can do things like that. Just be sure that when you create a named calculation, that you just add it to whatever cube dimension you want to. Then we discussed attribute, hierarchies, and relationships. If you want to define a parent-child relationship, you can do that by dragging and dropping the attributes onto the Hierarchy tab. And then on the next tab, which describes the attribute relationships, you can then specify which attributes are dependent on others. This will also be helpful if you're trying to perform secondary sorting. You simply create an attribute relationship between two different columns, and then you specify the appropriate sort column. Well, I hope this has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.